I went to the Tenement Museum, which is in New York City, and I highly recommend it, especially if you grew up in a city or a tenement, or even if you didn't. It tells a very interesting story about the country's history, immigration, etc. And it did stir some boyhood memories. I went down to the gift shop and purchased a doormat that is almost a perfect replica of a New York City sewer. I thought it'd be a good conversational piece for my office. Yes, believe it or not, that's a cloth doormat. Looks just like a cast iron foundry sewer. Now, what's interesting, my assistant, she saw it and it brought back memories for her. Now, she grew up in New Jersey, but her grandparents worked in a foundry. So she knew all about making wood patterns for castings, and that kind of brought back to me my shop classes at Brooklyn Tech, where we had foundries and designs with wood to basically make that. So this is the tenement I grew up in, and maybe not as glamorous as the one in the Lower East Side, but it's in Greenpoint, which is a up-and-coming place in Brooklyn these days. Where we now, granted, this is a lot older than I am, but we did used to play on the ball, and the manhole cover reminded me of how a great game we used to play called Punch Ball, where one sewer would be home plate, the other sewer would be second base, and the door handles on each side would be first and third. And if you were a power hitter, you could punch two sewers. That is, punch the rubber red ball and knock it past second base, past the next sewer, and that is somebody who was really strong. And okay, we would have a lot of intermissions as the cars would roll by, but we'd try to pick a side street where there wasn't much traffic. I guess getting back to the lonely sewer, that is a cast iron mold, it reminded me of my high school days. I went to Brooklyn Tech in the 70s and 80s, and probably right after that, America exported a lot of its manufacturing, including casting of metal parts, to Asia. But the city, which was in the depths of financial issues, had absolutely no money to modernize its shops. So we were still working in the woodworking shops and the casting, foundry, engineering shop of the Industrial Revolution. And as these teachers who are maybe 40 years our senior would say, maybe this isn't today's technology, but we're teaching you to think like an engineer, which may have been baloney, but as I've gotten older, I realized the times and days I felt logically working on a design on a T-square. It does teach a certain discipline on how to solve a problem, how to take a problem apart. Imagine all this from a manhole cover. Well, this is my home credenza, and I have my little Brooklyn Tech model. To the left, you see a wooden nameplate. So you go to a woodworking shop with your design that you made with your T-square, and you design out, along with the angles and the draft angles, this wood model, which you then bring to foundry, and you take the wood model and you place it in they called it sand, it was more like dirt, to make an impression to pour the molten metal in. This is the Brooklyn Tech Foundry back in the day. I mean, quite the massive, almost factory-like structure inside the high school. So it was a great curriculum. You went from designing the pattern, the wood pattern, bringing it to the foundry to use, pouring it, and then taking it to the machine shop to finish. Yes, back in the day, you'd work amongst the, as I said, they called it sand, but it was more like dirt, to place in a fixture that your wood part would go in, and then you would bring it over to where the ovens were with the molten aluminum to be poured down the runners into the mold. Then these products would go to the machine shop to be finished. Yes, believe it or not, in the 70s when I went to high school, this picture looks like it's from the 20s or 30s, they still had lathes that had the belts from the ceiling and they did date back to the 20s and 30s. I give the New York City Board of Education credit for, shall we say, maintaining these old antiques. Well, it was closed for many decades because somebody figured out that all the lead we were smelting, aluminum, caused it to be a toxic waste dump in the middle of the high school, so they sealed it up. Now they've created this whole new big, large social area for the high school students, so that's a nice thing to see the rebirth of the foundry. The machine shop, many fond days there. Back to the foundry. I guess as I end this, I'm sure we still make manhole covers primarily out of casting, molten metal. However, I did some internet searching, and some of the latest and greatest stuff is 3D printing, and how 3D printing is going to replace a lot of castings. And I thought to myself, when I go to Brooklyn Tech now, there's no more foundry, it's all computer-aided design stations. And as we think back about globalization, how that happened from the 70s to now, and now it is the bringing manufacturing back, reverse globalization, say, for a whole variety of reasons. The manufacture things have changed, but I think the thought process and the systematic way of designing, manufacturing, producing things, I guess those high school teachers are right. So all this came from a doormat that looks like a manhole.